Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth technical meeting of the year by the AACE International, the Australian section. My name is Fran Vera. I'm the events coordinator, and I'll be the host of the session tonight. But before getting started, I'm going to introduce Lou Vidotto. He's the Vice President of the AACE in Australia and the Area Chair of Queensland. He will run a few slides regarding the association, and he also will introduce us the speaker for tonight. Louis, are you okay to start?
Yeah, thank you very
showing
much.
Us your slides?
Yeah,
thank
sure.
You.
Well, good evening, everybody, and as Frank said, welcome to our technical meeting for this month. I'm going to run through a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of an agenda, and just a very short presentation that I do at the start of each webinar. I'll run through some meeting procedures, and then I'll just give an introduction to AACE International and AACE Australian section. And I always try to each month talk about something from the AACE website, International. And tonight I want to talk a little bit about estimate classification, which is something that we use day to day, and I think it's quite important. And the webinar tonight will be, it's called Contingency Cage Match, and a simultaneous contingency assessment methods and a case study. And then, so after the webinar, I'm going to let Matthew introduce himself when we get to the actual webinar. What I'd like to do then is at the end have some final questions to the speaker, and then we'll do an open mic and people can talk about the webinar tonight or something that's of interest to people that are in attendance tonight. Use the chat function to ask questions. Frank will be the moderator, and he'll and made at an appropriate time. We'll have a bit of a break if it's wherever Matthew thinks is appropriate, and we'll answer some of the questions, and then we'll do the same at the end of the presentation. As I said, open mic section at the end. Attendees will be muted during the presentations, and then you certainly have an opportunity to interact at key points in the presentation. Again, ask questions, and then Frank will open up and we'll get some interaction specifically from questions. Use the meeting chat feature. It says Teams, but we're actually using Zoom tonight. We'll make this webinar available on the AACE Australian section YouTube channel after the session, so everybody then can access it and have a look. And also to the slideshow will be presented on the AACE Australian section website. If you want to have a certificate of attendance, please email info@aacei.org.au. About AACE, it's called the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, and it's been serving the total cost management community since 1956, and it's committed to the constructive exchange of ideas between members, the development of technical guidance and quality education, and recognition of subject matter experts, which I probably class Matthew tonight, by the way. AACE Australia Board, we've got representation around most of Australia. As you can see from the slide, our president is Paul Harris, based out of New South Wales. Treasurer Yasid Abduladi. Cameron Baker is our website and social media coordinator. You've already met Frank, who's our events coordinator. Excuse me. Publications coordinator is Keith Farrell. Our sponsorship and alliance coordinator is Michael Wallace. And our area chair for Vic and New South Wales and Tasmania is Val Matthews. Alberto's here with us tonight, that I can tell, amongst other people. So he's the regional chair for New South Wales. I'm the chair for Queensland and vice president. In WA, we've got our secretary, Michael Anderson, who's come on board recently, doing a pretty good job. Our area representative and for WA Northern Territory is Alan Crowe, and our membership is Karen Chu. So please, as you go along, if you have questions, feel free to contact anyone in your state or even as part of the committee. So each month, before we start the webinar, I'll draw your attention to a part of the AACE website. Tonight, I'd very quickly like to go through total cost estimate classification system. Much of my work as a project controls professional is doing estimates and reviews, particularly in the mining and infrastructure areas. So a lot of clients hear about cost estimate preparation. So for gating purposes, a lot of the big mining and infrastructure companies have a gating process. So what level of estimate do we need? What accuracy? Estimate ranges required for estimate presentation is often known but not really understood. So what do I do when people ask me those questions? I fall back to the recommended practices. Once you get on the AACE website, there's I think 86 or something recommended practices, and they have a wealth of information on a standard way of doing different parts of work, which is part of our job. So I've just put up a picture of a couple of them that I tend to use, which is cost estimate classification system for mining and minerals, and also too for the construction for road, rail and transport infrastructure industries. So they're different practice numbers. So what do they offer? So their purpose is to actually give a unified or a consistent way of doing estimates and being able to assess them. So this is just a small excerpt out of one of the recommended practice. So please have a read. I'm not going to go through and read the whole slide. But what does it do? So as you go through classes of estimate, we progressively get better and better definition, ranging from large contingencies when we know pretty much nothing about a job to fairly good contingency when we've got a class 1 estimate. Again, this is just an excerpt out of the cost estimate classification. So if you need to know about estimates and how to pull them together, please refer to the recommended practices. I can't stress enough how important it is to all of us who do estimates. Speaker introduction. This is I'd like to introduce to you Matthew Schoenhardt. Tonight he's going to present a contingency cage match, a simultaneous contingency assessment methods, a case study. So Matthew's going to talk about his experience with contingency assessment using Monte Carlo simulation versus parametric estimating or systemic analysis. So in a cage match, which one will win? Will there be a clear winner? So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Matthew, who will present. And again, make sure you use the chat function if you have questions. So again, welcome to this webinar tonight. I'm going to stop sharing now.
And now I'm sharing. Everyone can see my screen. Quick nod of heads.
Okay. Yeah, all good to go.
Fantastic. So again, we talked about questions. We'll do that. If you have a question that's I'm not explaining something clearly, jump in the chat early, and Frank's going to interrupt me, because if you don't understand what I was saying, odds are someone else didn't understand also. If it's a discussion type thing, we'll hold those to the end. So there's a headshot of me, Matthew Schoenhardt, wearing a different suit. I like the intersection of business, engineering, project controls, undergraduate in engineering physics, master's of business, some other designations. And sort of my claim to fame is I've done over $100 billion of risk and contingency assessments. And you're supposed to tell something fun about you. I've got hives, and I caught them on purpose. Last summer here in Canada, things were pretty much shut down because of COVID. And so there was nothing for our kids to do. We've been keeping bees for about 5 years with my boys. And so we caught a lot of swarms of bees. We caught about 15 swarms of bees. There's one of the swarms we caught. We made a custom bee vacuum from Home Depot, you can see. And there's my eldest son harvesting some honey. And it's fabulous honey. The honey we produce, it's like it has these floral undertones like good wines. So if you're ever at like a farmer's market and you see local honey production, buy it. It's worth more than the store-bought stuff. So that's who I am. So the agenda for tonight, I'm going to go through what we're doing, how to assess contingency, look at the project, some complications, tell you how we did stuff, and then look at how much effort it took to make the two approaches go, and then compare the actual results with projected results, and then figure out our alignment with ACE guidelines. So this is a cage match. It's a title match. It's parametric contingency assessments versus Monte Carlo contingency assessments. It is the perfect face versus heel wrestling competition. We have Monte Carlos. He's big, he's muscular, he's super sexy. All the girls love him. Against parametric. He's a heel, he's small, he's scrawny, he thinks he knows it all. So the real question is, ladies and gentlemen, this title match has three components. Accuracy. If you can't do it accurately, there's no point. Cost. How much does it cost to make this assessment process go? And three, speed, because everybody likes speed. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble. So we're going to do some polls throughout the night. And the first poll we're going to do is just quick stuff about you. You know who I am. Tell me about who you are. So this is just a quick one. What kind of industries do you work in? And then what size projects do you typically work on? So here's the share results. We got a good mix of industries, a bunch of people in consulting, and a bunch of us work in those over $100 million projects, and a bunch of us work in the smaller projects. So today we're going to be talking primarily about large projects. I have a whole different mindset of how we do small projects, and maybe you'll invite me back if you like what I'm saying, and I can wake up again early in the morning and present a small project tool. So here's the next one. You've heard the title match, parametric versus range estimating. No, we won't do that poll next. So, in the world of contingency estimating, the first thing we need to talk about is what is contingency? And this is the ACE definition of contingency. Contingency is amount that we're going to add to our estimate for items that experience show likely result in additional costs. We expect contingency to be spent. So that's the definition of contingency. So if I know what the item is, it's in my base estimate, back to my levels of classification. So what contingency therefore includes is errors and omissions, price fluctuations, design developments, changes within your project scope, market variations, environmental conditions. Contingency explicitly does not include changes to business scope. So if you're building a house and it's, they say 2,000 square feet, 3 bedroom, 3 bath, and that's a business scope definition. You all of a sudden say, yeah, I like it now 3,000 square feet and 5 bedrooms and 6 bath with a pool. Okay, you've changed the business scope. Contingency does not cover that. If you say, I'd like the walls green instead of red, that's a change within your project scope, and that's covered by contingency. Force majeure acts of God, terrorism, excluded from contingency. Management reserves usually are used to fund changes to business scope. Escalation, the concept that things tend to cost more tomorrow than they do today. And currency variation. All those things are excluded from contingency. So whenever I talk about contingency today, I'm talking about all the things that cover all of these things on the left-hand side. So here's another fun poll. True or false? Ideally, a project should come in under budget and not spend its contingency. Who agrees with that statement? True, coming in shows off my skills as a project manager if I come in under. False, contingency is meant to be spent. Oh, you guys are fabulous. You're actually paying attention. Thank you. Yeah, again, contingency is meant to be spent. Not all owners think this way. A lot of people think coming in under is the desirable thing. A mature organization will say, if you are consistently coming in under budget, that means my budget was too high in the first place. And so again, we want to be close to the center, close to the estimated. And close means sometimes I'm going to be over and sometimes I'm going to be under. So again, contingency is meant to be spent. And my final question, well, not my final question for now. You know the cage match. We're going to place bets. We're doing this in person. We'd all get up and put our business cards out, and I'd have a prize, usually John Holman's book as the prize, and whoever wins gets the prize. So who do you think is going to win this cage match? Again, it's speed, accuracy, cost of completing. Who's going to win this? We're all voting. Some people are reluctant to vote or bet. If I was really sophisticated, we'd have a pari-mutuel competition going on here right now. So if we were doing pari-mutuel and you bet on Monte Carlo, three-quarters of the room agrees with you. If you bet on parametric, it'd be 25. So if you bet on parametric and it wins, you're going to get $1 will pay you 4. On Monte Carlo, guess what? $1 will only get you $1.25 if you win the bet. But those were the results. So let's go through. When it comes up to contingency, there's ACE supports sort of 4 families of contingency. There's a bias family, which is whether it's opinion-based or data-based, empirical-based. And then there's a simple way and a more sophisticated way. The first way of opinion-based is expert opinion. It's supported by ACE recommended practice 40R. And expert opinion goes like this. Hey, we got this project, and Frank's a subject matter expert. Frank, how much contingency do we need? And Frank says, oh, Frank has to unmute himself to say that though. Okay, Frank says 10%, right? Nod your head, Frank, yeah? Okay, Frank said, there we go. Frank, how much contingency do we need?
15%.
15%, excellent. And that works because Frank is a subject matter expert. He knows the project, he's done it before, he knows what's going on, and it's a legitimate way of coming up with the appropriate amount of contingency. There's some problems with that. The problems is Frank's opinion might change throughout the project. He might be having good days, he might be having bad days. That might affect his opinion about how much contingency he needs. And as a result, the expert opinion, while super fast and super easy, isn't consistent within a project, and it's not consistent between a family of projects. So there's some trade-offs to be made for that. The sophisticated approach of the opinion-based is range estimating or Monte Carlo techniques. And some people will take umbrage when I say that, but basically what happens almost all the time when we do these Monte Carlos, rather than asking Frank, what's the bottom line, what % contingency do I need? I asked Frank and Lewis and Alberto and everybody else on the project team, hey, here's my work breakdown structure. What's the range of this item? What's the best case, the worst case, the most likely case? And we go through all those things, and we take all those opinions, and we add a bunch of risks in, and we take all those opinions, do a bunch of math, and pretend it's data. That's the range estimating or Monte Carlo approach. Ideally, those ranges are all based on data, but often, due to limitations, we can't have them based on data. So that's why I put it in the opinion-based approach to contingency estimating. The other side is the empirical ones. And as was mentioned earlier by Lewis, there's ACE predetermined guidelines. This is abused and misused in the industry. However, it's fairly common. If I say something is an ACE class 3 estimate, most people will rhyme off the accuracy as plus 30 minus 20%. Now, when I talk to a lot more of the gray hairs and I mean that complimentary, the old wise people at ACE, where do these guidelines come from? Where was the data from it? And they say, we don't really know. It's just been there. And so I put it as part of the database because these guidelines stand the test of time. They seem to work, these rules of thumb. And the final database approach is the parametric or ACE 42R. And this says, hey, in the history of projects, your project's no more complicated and your project team's no more skilled than all the projects that have come before you. And so if you have a certain level of project definition, you will get a certain predictable outcome. And it sort of relies on the notion that large projects the world over are all the same. They all behave the same. And if you don't believe that, you can go almost read any IPA document that you want, they'll all say that. Now, when we look at this and we plot, we're going to be looking at some plots. These are probability distribution of plots right now. So we have the frequency on the vertical axis and the actual contingency or cost index along the bottom. Frank threw me off. I thought he was going to say 10%, but he said 15. But Frank is a uniform distribution, very thin, perfect knowledge. Predetermined guidelines give us horizontal distributions or uniform distributions. In ACE class 3, again, is -20 plus 30. Monte Carlos tend to give you a curve that looks like this. I've been doing Monte Carlos for a while. They always seem to look like that. And then parametric, or the systemic approach, gives you these fat, ugly curves with big right-hand tails. That's what they look like. So we'll move on to the project description. So back in 2012, I had the opportunity to do a contingency assessment on a midstream oil and gas facility here in Alberta. It was broken into 2 phases, but $130, $150 million each. And then the project finished in 2017, or was substantially complete. And we compared how much we actually spent. And what was really unique about this project is the owner company normally did parametric, but the project manager wanted to do both a parametric contingency assessment and a Monte Carlo. And at the time I said, this is a waste of money. You don't need to do both, blah, 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 blah. But I'm a consultant. So after telling him what I thought, he said, I still want to do it. So I did it. That's the nature of being a consultant. So a couple complications on this project. It was 2 phases. We had overburdened project teams. There was some disjointed project development. There was some interphase rivalry, and there was interphasal dependencies. And as project progressed, phase 2 was split into a 2A and 2B. So far, sounds like a normal project for most people. Yeah. Then we had some other problems. There was conflicting business scope. They used 6 different design firms. And then they had a third-party project manager, and that's why we were doing both methods of contingency assessments. And the third-party project manager was dismissed halfway through the project. So this project didn't end well. We'll just say it that way. And a lot of people are going to say, hey, your estimate wasn't very accurate. The project didn't come in at the P50. Well, we all have kids in this world, and we all think our kids are above average, but on average, half of us are wrong. Because on average, half of our kids are smarter than average, and on average, half of them are not as smart as average. That's what average means. So don't be expecting the results of this for me to be hitting the P50 bang on, because that doesn't happen all the time. So here's the methodology. And so we're going to go for the range estimating first, or the Monte Carlo approach. Again, this was back done in 2012. If I was doing it today, it'd be a little bit slightly different. We started off with risk interviews to develop our risk register. We qualitatively evaluated those for screening. Then we cleaned the risk register up, so we did a data scrub. We then did range and uncertainty. We got rid of duplicates, business opportunities, correlations, added all those things in the risk register. Then we did a risk review session where we went through and said, this is the risk, what's its, let's talk about it, what's its worst case impact, its best case impact, what's the probability. And we did that for all the risks in the risk register, both the systemic risks and the project specific risks. And then to that, we added a 3-point range estimating process for the entire work breakdown structure. Contrasting that was the parametric approach. Again, we had risk interviews, we did qualitative risk evaluation, we did a data scrub, and we're willing to do the data scrub to delimit between systemic risks and project-specific risks. And that is because in the risk review session, we were only quantitatively evaluating just the project-specific risks, which is about 10% of your overall risks. And then to that, we add the parametric contingency estimating process. And so what's nice about this is there's actually a lot of synergy between these two approaches. They're both using that risk register. And so all this upfront work was common and shared. And then finally, when we look at the contingency from the range estimating comes from two sources. One, it comes from that risk register. All those risks that we have with impacts and probabilities, they get fed into the contingency value. And I add to that range estimating process. And those two numbers give me my total contingency estimate or range of estimates for the Monte Carlo. The parametric, again, we're using that risk register, but only the project specific risks. Typically, if I'm doing a risk register, I did one 2 weeks ago, we had like 300 risks in it and 6 were project specific. So it's a much smaller number of risks. We add to that the parametric contingency process, and that gives us our dollar value. For risk interviews, let's do a quick poll. Oh, stop sharing the results. Let's keep staying up. What do you think is the best method of risk identification? Is it team workshops or is it expert interview? So most of us like team workshops as opposed to expert interview. So we're going to talk about the benefits and consequences of these two approaches. For this project, we did interviews. Now, if you are doing a workshop, basically you're going to need a full day, give or take, of your team's time. So 8 hours per team member. You'll need probably about 3 days of consultant time. And what's really nice about workshops is, especially early in the project, you get this cross-pollination of ideas and discussions, and that's really fun and exciting. They're fun to facilitate, and you get a lot of risks. One of the problems that can be of this is you can get a lot of groupthink. I don't know if you've ever been in a risk identification session where the director's in the room and the director says something and everybody goes, yes, we agree with the director, and we stop talking. I've been in some of those, and sometimes they're tricky to facilitate. The flip side is the one-on-one interview is you only need 1 hour per project team person. You still need about 3 days of the facilitator's time. What's nice about it is it allows anonymity. People can share their opinions without fear of repercussions from their colleagues or coworkers. And it allows you sort of to get that deep dive into their subject matter expertise range. What you then lack is the interdisciplinary play back and forth. And for this one, we did interviews. So a concept about accuracy versus precision. We got an archer, she's shooting at a target. I guess it's a he in this case, looking at the silhouette. He's shooting at a target, gets in the gray circle, shoots again in the blue, red. Oh, we got a bullseye there. So this is a representation of something that has fair accuracy and fair precision. What we see is a normal distribution centered around the target. And that's what I would say is called fair accuracy and fair precision. Low accuracy and good precision means my estimate is not anywhere close to where it should be. It's not on target. However, it's very consistent. I'm consistently shooting into that blue circle. I'm missing the target by a certain amount, but I'm consistently missing it by the same amount. So that is low accuracy and good precision when it comes to estimating. Good accuracy and poor precision. You remember the last one, my average was too high. In this case, my average is perfect. However, it's not a very repeatable process. I have poor precision. I got this uniform distribution. On average, I'm perfect, but any particular estimate is not very good. And so what we really want in this world is good accuracy and good precision in your estimating process. And that means I'm close to the center of the target all the time. And so this is how we did our range estimating. This was back in 2012. Technology was different. We used something called eye clickers at the time. And what we did is we we polled them about the accuracy of the line item estimate and the precision. And we had some predetermined buckets. This is what iClickers looked like at the time. Wow, it kind of looks really old now. And what would happen is we could get live polling, much like we're doing now. We'll do that in a second. And we would get results. And this is sort of a typical result. And we can do this by Zoom now. And so for giggles, we're going to do this by Zoom. And so this approach is basically a modified Delphi technique. And so we're going to ask two questions about accuracy and precision. Is what are the odds that I'm going to go over time in my presentation today? And that goes from remote, unlikely, possible, likely to almost certain. How likely is it am I going to go over my allotted time today? And then the second question, so that first question was an accuracy. And the second question is a precision question is, given that I'm going over my scheduled time, how much will I go over? A negligible, no schedule, limited overrun, significant overrun, major overrun, catastrophic, you're going to be here to midnight. So thanks. Most of you think that I'm probably going to go over, but it's only going to be a limited overrun, which, you know what, if you've heard me talk before, you're probably right. And so this is an example of how you can use the modified Delphi technique to do range and accuracy estimating and 3-point estimates on your work breakdown structure. Super easy to do now with Zoom. Now, probably most of you in Australia, you did your overseas experience, right? Everyone did their overseas experience, maybe? Yeah, there we go. I know it's very popular in Australia and New Zealand. You go to a foreign country, you don't speak the language, and you need to order in a restaurant, and they give you sort of pictures, and they show you this is what you can have, and there's a sort of you can point at the picture of what you want in the restaurant. Similarly, with these range and accuracies, we had an ordering by menu. So the first thing we did is say, hey, I know the price of my work breakdown structure item. I know it perfectly, and the price is right. I have the invoice. If that's the case, I have a uniform distribution. The next one is, the cost seems about right. My accuracy is on target, but the price varies widely. So my precision is very poor. That would give you a graph that looks like something like this. A third example might be, the cost is always higher and it varies widely. And that I have a fat distribution missing my average target. And so what we did beforehand, before we gave out the iClickers, is we told everybody this sort of menu. We gave them the menu of a 5x5 matrix, because the clickers at the time were limited to 5 buttons. Today with Zoom, you could do as many buttons as you wanted. So we had increasing range of costs, so worsening precision. So at the highest level, we had the fattest distribution, and at the lowest level, we had perfect knowledge. We had overestimating cost on the left-hand side and underestimating cost on the right-hand side. And so with the iClickers, you get a 5x5 grid, and it lets people sort of pick the accuracy of each work breakdown structure item. And the reason why we did this is range estimating for Monte Carlos is not fun, and it takes a lot of time. And using this technique, we got each range estimate for each item down to about 5 minutes. And how we did that was this. For our range estimating exercise, we started at the work breakdown structure level 4. We reviewed the basis of estimate for that item. If the value was over $1 million, we started. If it was under $1 million, we would pool the dollars of like items till we got a pool of $1 million in the work breakdown structure. And we said, hey, we have these predefined ranges for precision and accuracy. Are they acceptable? And everybody would sort of nod. If they were not acceptable, we'd do a custom range. It happened a couple times. Then I said, if you don't know anything about this work breakdown structure item, opt out. You don't have to vote. We run the Delphi poll for accuracy and precision using the iClickers. And we would either get typical results, this bucket, or atypical results. If we got atypical results, we'd go back and we'd say, hey, let's talk about the basis of estimate. Does everybody understand what we're actually talking about here? Let's review the ranges. 1 is best and 5 is worst, remember that. And then we'd re-poll. And if the poll came out atypical again, we would leave it. But we wanted to make sure we weren't getting an error in our understanding or the technology giving us poor results. And this Delphi poll basically became the range estimate for that work breakdown structure item. So here's how the parametric system works. The parametric system, in my opinion, sort of came about in, well, there was one from the 50s, but it met its sort of maturity in the late 1970s with the oil crisis, and the Rand Corporation was contracted to understand why major oil plants in the United States were going over budget and over schedule. And they came up with sort of four main reasons. And since then, the lead author of that, Ed Mara, went on to form IPA, Independent Project Analysis. He's made himself rich by doing it, very jealous. And since that, in the 1980 paper the Rand published, we have come to understand that somewhere between 70 to 90% of all project risks on major projects are systemic. And 2/3 of them are driven by the planning prior to sanction. So what ACE classification did you do your estimate at? And then we have some other variations for feedstock, escalation, social regulatory license. These days, this is seeming a lot bigger here in Canada. Don't know about Australia. Then you have new technology, the complexity of the plant, and the ownership structure. And then recently, ACE has changed, come up with a new guideline. I've been doing this way for a decade, but the new guideline that just came out February-ish, then says you add to that project-specific risk, which is going to be somewhere around 10 to 30% of your risks from your risk register, and you model that with a Monte Carlo, and that gives you the contingency method. And that's the one I use. So I wasn't doing the pure parametric method. I'm doing a hybrid method that has now actually officially have its own recommended practice. So one of the key and most important parts of this parametric approach is understanding the difference between systemic risks and project-specific risks. Because again, going back to that graph, we know that 70 to 90% of all of your cost variation is due to systemic risks. And again, when I do a risk register, I'll have like 200-300 items in the risk register, maybe 10 are project-specific. So it's much less than you think. So here's what systemic risks are. Systemic risks are always addressed by progressive stage gate development. You know, I might have a risk. I have concerns about the soil conditions. Well, how do you fix that risk? You advance your project. You go from a desktop geotechnical study to a borehole program. So I fix that risk or address it by progressive development. That's a systemic risk. The next one is fears that don't have credible threats. You know, late engineering drawings. I mean, what are the odds of late engineering drawings on your project? Well, they're like 100%. But, you know, what are the consequences? Well, I don't know what they are. So these are fears without credible threats. If I can't readily estimate the risk's probability and impact, odds are it's systemic. Back to those late engineering drawings, the probability is 100%. The consequences might be, well, trivial. They might be only late by a day to catastrophic. They're not only late, but they're wrong. And so if you can't readily estimate a risk's probability and impact, it's probably systemic. And this is my favorite example of a systemic risk is if the response to that risk, to address that risk or mitigate it, is basically we should do better or we should do our job. I mean, you don't say it that way, but at its heart, the risk response is let's do a good job and let's not screw this up. If that's your risk response, it's probably a systemic risk. On the flip side, we have project-specific risks. Project-specific risks can also come about because of contradictions of data, logic, or industry best practices. If your schedule has no weather delay days, guess what? You've made a poor assumption and you've created a project-specific risk. We're going to fast track the project. We're not going to do our normal stage gate development. We're going to forecast that our cost productivity is going to be 100%, even though all of our cost performance so far is at a cost performance index of 70%. We're ignoring data. We're going to assume we're going to have expedited regulatory approval. These are assumptions that come to bite us in the ass, and they tend to be project-specific risks. The next one is we ignore credible threats. In Canada, we have a lot of First Nations consultation issues. And if you have a letter from this First Nation saying, we're going to oppose you at every step of the way, and you decide not to put in funding to address that, well, you're ignoring a credible threat. That tends to be a project-specific risk. The third one is project-specific risks can usually be estimated reasonably. You can come up with probabilities and impact ranges for them. And the fourth project are going to be constraints. So here in Canada, if you're doing things in the boreal forest, there's an ungulate zone. Moose are mating, and you're not allowed to do anything in the ungulate zone when the moose are mating. So if you haven't cleaned your right-of-way for a pipeline on February 15th, you can come back next year if you need 2 more days. Those are seasonal construction issues, and they're constraints. Another fun one are board approval dates. You know, if I don't get my CapEx into the board this month, I got to wait 2 months to the next board meeting to get board approval and sanction. And these tend to be project-specific risks. And understanding the difference is really important to do parametric contingency assessments correctly. Now, in terms of the tool, there's a couple tools out there. John Holman, you can get one for free from AACE. It's a very basic tool. John Holman's made his own tool. I've made my own tool. A couple other people in the world have made their own tools. This is my tool. Basically, it's 50 questions, multiple choice. And there's questions about your business fundamentals, your scope, your planning, your design, your engineering, the nature of your team, the reviews you've done, and the risk modifiers. And what happens is we sit down at a team and say, you know, for our business case, where are we today in understanding our business case? And that would range from, hey, I have a partial list of business drivers and objectives, all the way to all team leads can clearly explain the priorities of the project and use them or have demonstrated their use to make business trade-offs during project execution. And obviously, as I move from left to right, my level of understanding of my project increases dramatically. And so we spend about 2 hours as a team going through these 50 multiple choice questions. And part of my job as the facilitator is to nudge them when they're being pessimistic or clip their wings a little bit if they're being optimistic. So like one of the questions is like, tell me about the nature of your schedule. And I've seen their schedule before. And if they say, you know, it's 1 page, it's like, no, I've seen your schedule. It's multiple pages. It's done in Primavera. You got like 4 pages and links in there. You're not a, you know, you got a level 4 schedule going. And so that is how we do the systemic questionnaire. And again, this systemic questionnaire is evaluating that big pie that we saw earlier. So that is how we assess the contingency on this project for the 2 methods, the parametric and the range estimating model. We did a couple things that are abnormal, and so I wanted to address some methodological flaws that might have come up. So the first one is, most of you believe that risk workshops are the best way to identify risk. 75% of you said that. And so the question is, do risk interviews cut the risk identification process short? And so I actually went back at that. I do both. And I looked at a bunch of projects where I did workshops and a bunch of projects where I did interviews. And I said, how many unique risks did I get? And how many duplicates risks did I get? And I looked at it and said, you know what? My own data says I don't see a noticeable difference between the quantity of risks I get from interviews versus workshops. And so that was really good. It might be this, I pretend it's the skill of the interviewer. If you don't have a skilled interviewer, you might need to do a workshop. If it's later in the project, say to class 3, you probably can get away with interviews as opposed to workshops. If you're doing class 5 risk identification, like you're doing class 5 estimate, you might want to do workshops. One of the other benefits of this approach is during that risk review session, we are still getting together as a team to talk about all the key risks. So we still do get some of that into play. So the answer I had from this is that risk identification doing interviews doesn't substantially impact the quantity of risks we identify. The next one is we didn't do free-form range estimates on our work breakdown structure. We didn't say, okay, this one, you know, will go from a high of this dollar value to a low of this dollar value and a most likely of this. We use this heat clicker map, this 5x5 accuracy and precision grid. And so did that process constrain us? And so what I did is a heat map. and for phase 1 and phase 2. And I said, how often did we pick the outliers? How often did it beat a 5-5 or a 1-5 or a 1-1? And when I show that heat map, we can see that based on people's voting results, they did not seem to be constrained by the actual tool. They didn't always end up saying, you know, this is a 5-5. If the 5-5s was a dark orange and a high heat map, maybe my this iClicker technique constrained people's opinions way too much. But looking at these heat maps, it seems that it did not arbitrarily constrain people from picking larger ranges in my range estimating process. So now we get into results, because this is where the money is. And the first one is resource requirements. So at the time when I did this, I was working for Stantec, and we spent 263 consultant hours, and that's how we had the breakdown. So let's see how that is actually allocated. So when we look at the consultant hours, we have common tasks. That was project setup, risk interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And the common tasks consumed about 140 man hours. Then we spent an additional approximately 100 man hours dedicated to the range estimating activities. Because that range estimating activity, even though we were doing iClickers and we could get through the 100 line items in 5 minutes each, it still takes a half a day. If you're doing open-ended, it's probably going to take a full day or more. There we go. That's how much time we spent on the range estimating portion. The parametric portion had all those common tasks. And we spent a little bit of time doing the parametric approach. And then what's interesting on this is it's a waterfall chart. If I just take away the standalone time just for doing a range estimate, I get this incremental effort for doing a parametric. And what's interesting about this is if you're already doing a Monte Carlo and you're doing range estimating, the actual incremental effort from the consultant or expert's time to add in a parametric is actually really minimal. It's less than 10%. So that's a very interesting takeaway. Then the other one is, while I'm a consultant and everyone's going to say I'm expensive, my cost per hour is nothing compared to your team's time cost per hour. So common tasks took about 50 project team hours. The range estimating took about 150 project team hours, because again, we need everybody in the room doing those iClickers, 5 minutes each. You know, it's $250, $300 million of estimating, so you got like 300 line items to go through. Then we had the time for the parametric. Again, we need everybody in a room for 2 to 3 hours to go through the parametric tool. So there's a fair amount of hours there. But we do that waterfall again, and we see adding the parametric contingency assessment process. If I'm already doing a Monte Carlo, again, we're adding less than 10% additional man hours. So that's something interesting to see. The other takeaway is the range estimating approach does take a lot more both consultant time and a lot more team time. So now we're into money shots, results. So this was phase 1. We have the parametric contingency. I'm showing a cumulative frequency diagram here. So my point estimate in range 1 was, about 140, 150 million. And the parametric said the odds of meeting that were 10% or less. So 10% of the time, we would hit the base estimate. The range estimate is the blue line. It's going to be a steeper curve and a shorter range. And that's what you'd expect from a Monte Carlo. And that's what the curves look like. So, and how you read this, by the way, is you can what's nice about cumulative frequency diagrams is if you want to say, what are the odds of hitting 170 million? Both projects, both contingency methods agreed that 170 million would happen about we'd be under 170 million 90% of the time. So 170 million was my P90. And so 1 out of 10 times I'd go above 170 million. So how do we actually do? The actual cost came in at about $173 million. And so what we can see there is, while that's like at, the P10 for the parametric approach, it's almost off the scale for the range estimating approach. The range estimating approach was barely able to predict this cost. Now, for people who like data tables, there's the data table there. We have the base estimate, we have the range estimated risk, the systemic risks, the project specific risks, and the totals. And that would be for the P50s. Now for phase 2, again, we get this fat right-hand curve. We see the base estimate of about 157 million or so. We see that's about a P20, P25 on the parametric. And the odds of the range estimating saying as I hitting that base would be 0%. It's not even on the curve. And again, the range estimate, a nice tighter distribution, which makes finance people happy. And so where did this project of phase 2K come in? It came in also about at $205 million, which what we can see here is, while it's still in that P90 range, P10 range of the parametric, the range estimating wholly and completely failed to forecast that cost. Not only was it out of the range, it was like so far out of the range, it was unbelievable. And again, here are the number breakdowns. So we can see in 2 of the cases, this is an actual project again. In one case, both approaches were able to approximate the actual cost. However, for one of the phases, only parametric was actually able to predict the actual cost outcome. Whereas the range estimating technique wholly and completely failed to even contemplate that kind of cost overrun. So the next question we have is, how do these approaches agree with ACE guidelines? And the ACE guidelines, I don't have what guideline here is. There's a general agreement of how you do contingency, and there's objectives. And you say, you need to meet client objectives. Both range estimating and parametric do that. You need to have a risk management process, check, check. It's fit for use, yes. You identify risk drivers, that's using that risk register, both do that. You link those risks to cost outcomes, absolutely. You need to avoid, I can never pronounce this well, intrajogenic, self-inflicted risks. Range estimating has a limited ability to do that, and parametric mostly avoids it. So some of these self-inflicted risks will be our heuristic biases of how we think and how we come up with ranges and estimates. We need to employ data. Range estimating does that to somewhat, parametric does that a lot. We need to be competent. I like to pretend I'm competent. Some people think I'm a world expert. So yeah, I think it was competent. You need probabilistic results. Both methods provide those sexy, sweet probabilistic curves that finance people like to run financial investment decisions on. And that's because they support the financial decision-making process. So both these methods clearly meet the ACE objectives for risk management. So here's our conclusions for you. The parametric approach gives us probabilistic results, gives a wide range of outcomes, and was able to predict both cost outcomes. Range estimating, again, we got those probabilistic results. The ranges were much narrower. However, in one case, the range estimating process completely failed to predict the actual cost outcome. So here's some thoughts for you on resource conservation. Spending less to get more done. This iClickers, or the modified Delphi technique, saves you a lot of project team hours. It probably cut the number of project team hours for the range estimating process in half. So it's tremendous, and it didn't seem to impact the ranges that were coming out. Using risk identification doesn't seem to hinder the risk, using interviews for the risk identification process, it doesn't seem to affect the quality of the overall number of risks we get, the quantity, and that will save you a bunch of project team hours too, something to consider. Both don't appear to compromise your risk management process. Here's some other takeaways. The parametric contingency process took 40% less consulting hours than the Monte Carlo and took 60% less project team hours. That saves you a bunch of money. It's also much faster. And again, with the range estimating, we probably cut the number of hours we needed for that in half because we're using the clickers. So this parametric approach really requires a lot less effort to drive the system. However, if you're already doing a range estimate, one of the fun takeaways that I came out with that I didn't expect is adding a parametric assessment to your range estimate is a minimal cost, and it gives you some extra data points to think about. So that's tremendous value for a very low price. So that's something to think about if your organization's wed to Monte Carlos. And so for me, the winner today is this. The parametric system, it was better. It was more able to accurately predict cost outcomes. It was substantially faster, and it was substantially cheaper. And therefore, is the best, what I think is the best practice. Let's see what you guys now think. So having seen this presentation, who do you think would win a contingency cage match? Expert opinion, Frank's 15%, ACE guidelines, Monte Carlos, or parametrics? No wrong answers in this. Well, my job as a proselytizing today is done, I think, because I seem to have convinced a lot of you to go from 75% thinking Monte Carlo was the best. Having seen this, a lot of you now would think parametric is the best. So I guess it was a successful presentation because I have done both. And let me just stop sharing that. And when I was introduced to the parametric approach about 10 years ago, I calibrated a major pipeline company's parametric tool here in Canada, and I was gobsmacked by the accuracy. When I weighted the projects by project count versus spend, the forecasted P50 was within 0.5% above or below. It was an outstanding accuracy, and it's so much faster and cheaper. Basically, I can do parametric contingency assessments. You know, we can start on Monday, and I can give you the final report on Friday. And that includes risk interviews, the workshop, everything. You can get it done in like 40 consultant hours. So now it's time for questions. And I know there was some. Where'd my chat go?
Yeah. Matthew, we have a question from Shokre. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it properly, but he's asking if is there any, in the case study that you have showed us tonight, there any post-project analysis to see the lessons learned? Where did the assumptions go wrong on risk identifications and consequences?
What happened is this project became a 4-letter word at this organization. The vice president of engineering who was with the organization when the project started wasn't with the organization about a year after when the project finished. I'm not saying that was causality there. I actually offered to do, working with them, I offered to do a post-project study. And they said, no, we don't want to spend money on that. And it's like, okay, you know what? I'm interested in making this paper. I'll do it for free. And you know what they said? No, if you write a report, we have to read it. And I don't want to read it. Literally, that's what they said. It's like, but it's free. It's like, no, if you write it, I'm going to feel obligated to do something with it. I don't want an analysis of why we screwed up on this project. But that being said, there was a couple things that went wrong. One is they screwed up their geotechnical. Because they were using so many engineering design firms, the battery limits between those engineering firms were not clearly defined. And I know they had about a $10 to $15 million cost overrun on civil earthworks because the two engineering companies used different assumptions on the geotech. So that when I talked about, you know, the 6 different engineering firms and the fact they had to fire their project manager halfway through the project, those things definitely contributed to a lot of the screw ups. So I would have loved to have done an in-depth analysis of this. But again, they, not only did they not want to pay for it, they didn't even want it if it was free because it was that much of a 4-letter word. And what's funny about that, or what I find funny is I've given this presentation a couple times and some people said, hey, you know, your parametric didn't do that good. It was at the P90, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, guess what? You know what P90 means? P90 means 1 in 10 projects will exceed the P90. That's what the P90 means. And you know, I would love to have said I did this all on purpose, but this was a real world project. We did it in 2012, and then, you know, 4 or 5 years later, we said, hey, let's compare the two processes, because they're not often done at the same time by the same people. So that's why it was fun. That answer your question?
Yeah, there's another interesting question that actually interests me a lot as well. So how many data points or projects were used to develop the parametric model? Is it based on a regression analysis?
Oh, that's a hard one. So yes and no. So the original RAND paper, you can get it. If you don't have it, personal message. So I'm on LinkedIn. Join me on LinkedIn. You can personal message me. I can send you a copy of the RAND paper. It was originally done on linear regression, and it used 4 variables to predict the cost outcomes. And it was actually really accurate. If you go through some of my LinkedIn posts, I do a quick history of the parametric approach. And it was based on linear regression. And that was the original RAND model. It was based on, I think, 60 to 80 data points, which is not very many. When I do, say, a small project contingency tool, I'm using like 2,000 data points. For my large project tool, I actually, it's going to sound funny, the nature of the data has changed and how I think about it's changed. I've moved from linear regression, which is a very deterministic worldview, to a probability concept. And so I don't think of them as data points anymore. I think of them as probability curves. And so since that original RAND model, you can, if you want to spend the time and effort, go out and collect basically databases of thousands of data points. And so my model's literally effectively based on thousands of data points. I joke, I don't measure it in data points, I measure it in papers. And I got like a binder about this thick of all the papers that I've used to create my tool. Yeah, it's remarkably accurate. John Holman's tool is also very accurate. One of the key things though is you need to make sure that you understand the difference between project-specific risks and systemic risks. And you also have to know when the tool's appropriate to use and when it's not appropriate to use. So the tool we're talking about today is a large project tool. And 2/3 of all large projects fail. And that means they go over budget by more than 25%, they miss their schedule by 25%, or they don't meet their base business scope within 2 years of startup. And so major projects have a very different behavior than small projects. So we talked earlier, some of you are doing projects in that $5 to $10 million range. Whole different presentation, because small projects have a very different project behavior. They don't have that fat right-hand cost overrun tail. So I think we answered that question. Yes, my model does schedule and cost. And I will say, I'll say this in terms of cost and schedule. Where the parametric does a really, really good job is in those class 5, class 4 estimates. I think it does a fantastic job in class 3 too, 3 also. However, when it starts coming to schedule, as you get a much more advanced estimate, I know I'm proselytizing about the parametric benefits. If you start getting into those nitty-gritty details, that's when I would say doing a range estimate Monte Carlo on your schedule makes sense. If you're doing like a turnaround or something that's schedule critical, I would not trust the parametric 100%. Because as soon as you get into that detailed construction execution, you need to start looking at a lot more minutia. So if you have like a class 2 estimate, I would not advise using a parametric schedule contingency solution. I'd say do a Monte Carlo on your class 2 schedule.
There is a question about the process you presented tonight as well. Does the range analysis apply to a base estimate or the contingency or the combination of both?
So the range estimating is just on your work breakdown structure. So it's all the known costs. So in your work breakdown structure, you're going to have, you know, your millwright's labor, your electrician's labor, et cetera, et cetera. And what you do is you go through on those and say, how accurate is that number? If you're hardcore, you'd say, you know, how accurate is my labor rate per hour? And do a 3-point estimate in labor rate. And then you could say, how accurate is my number of hours? You could do a 3-point estimate on that. We just did on the total number, what's the range of the total number? So the range estimating is just done on the work breakdown structure. A. B, in terms of risks, project-specific risks or risks in general, I don't say that very clearly. For both approaches for risks, when you identify the risks, you come up with a probability and an impact. And what I actually do personally, and in this case also, is we'd have a 3-point cost and a 3-point schedule impact, and we'd have a probability. And that probability is using a verbal anchor, 5-point verbal anchor score, going from remote chance to almost certain. And I've used a bunch of psychology. I saw a great post on LinkedIn 3-4 days ago doing a similar thing. When someone says, you know, risk is probable, what does that actually mean in terms of numbers? I've used a lot of that psychology to help come up with those verbal anchors. So yes, we still with the risks, both the project-specific risks for the parametric approach and all the risks for the Monte Carlo approach, you're still doing sort of 3-point impacts on those project-specific risks. Did I answer your question? Yes, give me a second.
Yeah.
Leo, did I answer your question, Leo?
Hopefully.
And
yeah,
again,
I think it was very, very clear for Leo, I think.
And when you're looking at the total contingency, the Monte Carlo is you have that, the risk register plus the range estimating process equals your total contingency. And for the parametric, it's that risk register, but a much, much smaller risk register, the parametric process, and that equals your contingency.
Yeah, yep, it's clearer. Okay, we have another question from Albert. He's asking if you have validated the cost estimate accuracy using, well, this methodology as the design progresses and you have a better definition of the project scope and strategy.
So yes, the tool has been validated. Yeah, sorry, and this gets to, sorry. 2 thoughts here. One, yes, the tool is validated and calibrated. And the other one is, does it help? So one of the things that isn't in the ACE guidelines, there we are. No, that's not the ACE guidelines. One of the things in the ACE guidelines isn't, unfortunately, is, does it actually help you get better outcomes? Because this is one of the things like saying I was taught as a young age. It's like there's a couple types of accountants in this world. There's the accountants who will tell you the score after the game is done. And there's the accountants who will tell you the score during the game. And there's the best type of accountants who will tell you what the score will probably be at the end of the game. And I think of the same thing of risk management. I don't just want to tell you what the cost outcomes will be before you start. I want to tell you what things you can do to fix or improve those cost outcomes. And so part of my standard reporting says is, you know, here's the numbers, here's probability charts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, if you don't like those numbers, because nobody ever does, because again, they're fatter ranges, right? Here's the things you can go do to make a tighter distribution. And if you go do all these things, this is the kind of tighter distribution you get. It might not be centered at the same number. It might have shifted, but it'll give you a tighter distribution. And to that point, in terms of improving outcomes, my favorite, it was an interview with a pipeline company. Oh, sorry, I got too big. It was a favorite pipeline company. We're going through these questions. And one of the questions in terms of design is water. And for water, we say, you know, process water, fire water, hydro test water, potable water. And we go through the different water things and what have you done on these? And it's a pipeline project and they went, hydro test water. Yeah, we need hydro test water, don't we? Because it hadn't been in the project plan at all. And the joke was, just by asking that question that day, I more than saved them my fees just by that one question. So what's nice about this is it is stage gate process development systemically drives that risk distribution down, that probability distribution. And what these questions do is it fundamentally forces you to go through that kind of stage gate process. One of the benefits is, again, it's 50 questions. I like printing it out on a single piece of paper, not because you can actually read all the boxes, but what will happen is the boxes in my tool highlight blue when you pick them. And you can sort of look down, and if all your answers are in a straight line, you have a very uniform project development process, which will encourage low risk. But if you have a very jagged line, some deliverables are racing ahead. I'm doing a project right now on the west coast of Canada, a small pipeline project, and some of their design deliverables are like an ACE class 2 level of development, yet they haven't actually acquired their land yet. And it's like that disjointed development is going to cause you problems. Did I answer your question? Let me get, I might lost my chat.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions from John Boyle. Yeah, the only issue he finds, he says, is about the parametric method losing and underpinning drivers. Like he tends to use the influence diagrams, which flashes out queries, not just numbers.
Yes.
Go
ahead.
No, go on. Yep.
And again, you need to have that risk register. And with that risk register, again, this presentation was on how to develop and identify and evaluate risks, but you still need to have that risk register, and you need to use the risk meta language of something happens because of something resulting in something. You need to find those risk drivers, because one thing I tell a lot of clients is just because a risk is systemic doesn't mean you can't mitigate it. And the mitigation activities for most systemic risks are, let's do our job. And I mean that very facetiously. But it's like, well, sometimes we need to be told to go do our job properly and use industry best practices and follow up with outstanding action items. And so using the risk register and risk management as an ongoing process versus one assessment, I'm a huge believer in. And so, yes, you still need to look at those risk drivers. For this presentation today, I was just sort of looking at the mathematics of the tools. Is that fair, John?
Yeah. Well, he has another comment at the end of the chat box, if you want to jump in and have a look. He's talking about the engineering maturity. But John, if you find harder to type down the questions, you can unmute yourself and maybe explain a little bit more about the questions.
So here's the fun one, and I'm an engineer also, and I like to think I'm the most important person in the world. But we're actually on this slide right now. Only 6 of my 50 questions are about engineering. And the reason for that is when I was at Stantec, I had the privilege of doing a lot of work with our executive suite. And he taught me 15 years ago, he's like, Matt, you know when we get sued? I was like, yeah, it's horrible. I was like, we never get sued because we did the design calculations wrong. We don't get sued because the bridge falls down. We get sued because of all these other things. We get sued because we didn't understand the deliverables, or the deliverables we got from another company were not used correctly in our calculations. Engineers in the Western world tend not to screw up the base stuff. They tend to do it right. And there's a lot of checks and balances in there for doing that. Where we screw up is the boundary limits between engineering. So if I don't have a well-defined business scope, I can't have a well-defined project scope. And the engineering company, design firm, that's outside of their realm. If I, and here's the front ones. And again, I do not know Australia well enough. I apologize. I was there as a teenager for the World Scout Jamboree, and I haven't been back since. And that was a long time ago.
Hey Matthew, it's John Boyle. Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Go on.
Great presentation. So thank you for that. I'm a John Holland user, so sorry if I'm sort of using an opposing model, but just a couple of queries.
John is a great guy.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. So, and it's nice to meet you, actually. I didn't know you were there, so I've just learned somebody else in the game as well, so that's great.
Yeah.
Just a couple of queries, though. When you're obviously using the clickers, I like to look at three things. I like to think about the benchmark bed. So I like to understand what the benchmark bed is for the industry. I like to use Monte Carlo, and I like to use the hybrid model. I think your analysis was fantastic on that extra cost to sort of see the whole view of the project. I think though the only thing where I got lost and a little shouting no at the screen a little bit was, and I suppose that's the point I was going to make, is the clicker system. I understand the clicker system, what you're doing with that, but what I was going to say, and the way I facilitate it is, the numbers are fantastic that you get out of it, and at the end of the day, you know, like any estimate, they're always a guess of how good they are. What I tend to find is what comes out of those sessions, however way you do it, is the valuable the information for the team to put them on the right path to solve the issues of the project. So the clicker mechanism worries me a little bit, in that you're getting the right answer, a number answer, but you're not really exploring why there's the uncertainty, you know, that 100% uncertainty. You are doing that in your discrete risk, less than 100%, but you're not really looking and exploring why that quantity or rate uncertainty lives there, and why, yes, you know, it can get fixed. So that was my only point I was making there, in that it's a very, you know, it's a very fixed way. So that was one point. The second point I wanted to explore.
Sorry, and John, I agree with you. It's and yes, I'll say, again, I come back to like risk interviews versus workshops. It's the same kind of thought process, John. It's the more you put into something, the more you get out of it.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. Like I love doing risk workshops because it juices me, and you get a lot more in-depth understanding of things. The question I'm sort of putting here, and again, I don't have a firm answer, is given that I'm sort of increasing the amount of effort by doubling it, am I getting double the value necessary?
Yeah, but Matthew, I think what you've got caught in here, what I find very frustrating about this whole game, and I've been in it for 10 years.
Yeah.
How long do you spend putting an estimate together? No, but that's what I always say to clients. You spend months putting an estimate together, and you want to do it in a day. So to me, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous the way that we do it at the moment. We come in at the end, it's in a rush, and they want a result. You know, so I think we've got to change that perception of how we do, analysis. So that's my first point and my first response. So that was an aside.
I think, John. Sorry, I think that it's almost an afterthought doing the risk ranging. In our study schedules, we don't allow enough time to do them.
Absolutely not.
No, we don't. So it's crazy. So that's always my game. But the other thing, Matthew, I've got you. I'm sorry, I'm dominating. Is we're obviously using the Holman model quite a bit here in Australia. So you've got a way to catch up with John. But it's interesting what people are starting to do on that schedule side. Colin Cropley, I don't know if you know Colin, is at the moment sort of using it to use the systemic side on the to use that and then overlay onto the schedule the systemic risk, and then still building the uncertainty and still building the discrete side. So are you doing anything like that in a Monte Carlo sense, where you're using the systemic output from the schedule and start to overlay that, and then still put the uncertainty and still put the discrete on there? I just wondered if you've thought about that or done any of that.
So I live in Alberta, which is like Texas North. So it's a lot of oil and gas business.
Yeah.
And none of my clients are on the phone right now. Most of their schedules suck.
Yeah. Everywhere. It's not just you, Matthew.
So, I mean, sorry, we're all project controls people, and it's like, you know what, owners don't spend enough money on project controls, and then they don't spend enough money on project controls that I do. A lot of their schedules are very poor. A lot of them are developed by engineering companies, and the engineering company, it's like in a 4-page schedule, they do 3 pages of engineering activities, a half a page or 3/4 of a page on half a page on procurement, quarter page on construction and a single line item for commissioning. And so for a lot of my clients, encouraging them to get a better schedule is a precursor to doing it.
I get you. So what you're saying, the maturity is not there to start to sort of get that sophisticated. So, okay.
Yeah, it's there. They need to start learning how to walk because.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah. And then the last point I'd like to make, and I'll let other people chip in there. I found it really interesting, you know, and I've been saying the same. What I've realised, and we're using this very much with BMA over here in Australia, and they're now using it holistically, the John Holland model. And I think your comments before, I was screaming at the screen saying, yeah, go Matthew, was when you started to talk more in depth around about the engineering maturity and the specific steps around geotech. And I think the thing I find a little bit frustrating with the AACE guidelines is that, at least in John's model, I've not seen your model, so I don't know how it compares, but the AACE guidelines across the various sort of industrial sectors will sort of use this sort of preliminary one-word descriptor for the class of the estimate. And I just think it would be good if, you know, we'd improve all our organisations if we could start, like John has started to try and do, to try and say, well, what do you mean by that? For each one of those, because I think you would help organisations vastly improve the stage gates, that they knew what they had to get done as deliverables at those stage gates. So I don't know what you think about that, but that's just my opinion.
I agree. I'll say you know, the ACE guidelines, for people who haven't seen it, give me a second. They'll say, you know, here's a deliverable, and they'll say, you know, at a class 5, it's not begun, or it's preliminary, or it's detailed. But they actually don't tell you what detailed is. So I did a LinkedIn post last week about digging a hole. And we've been on our own more or less to define what is a detailed geotechnical report. Is that a single borehole, or is that a borehole program? And unfortunately, ACE doesn't give you very direct guidelines on that. And so, like in my tool.
Look, I might just interrupt a little bit now and maybe call an end to the actual presentation.